Well, thank you for coming. God, there's a lot of you. I'd rather be shot at by a 50 caliber machine gun than talk to this many people at once. But so let me, I think what I'm going to do tonight, rather than, read at length from the book, I've got some wonderful photos here taken by photographers who were actually with me, and so I can actually claim to have seen everything here in these photos. And I thought I would just talk a little bit about kind of what's in the book and what I tried to do, and I'll probably stop here and there, but I'm not gonna go on too long because I want to take some questions of yours if you have them. But I was in this kind of looking back in this unique position. It was 10 years ago, almost to the day, that I was sitting in the Kabul Sports Stadium on a Friday afternoon, watching these very strange-looking men reading religious verses, putting someone to death in a public ceremony. And of course, it was the Taliban. And of course, at the time, it didn't really mean very much. These are just kind of very strange people in a very strange place that everybody had kind of forgotten about. And it was only later, of course, that it obviously meant so much. So I want to kind of walk you through some of what I saw. It's funny, I actually put a map of Afghanistan here as if anybody needs to see one. The thing about the thing to remember about Afghanistan, I don't know how many of you can you see this well? Is it good? The thing about Afghanistan is when you go there, it's like you step off the helicopter and it's just this kind of extraordinary place. It's like you're kind of stepping into the 4th century. You go to these villages that kind of haven't really seen the wheel yet, and they don't have electricity and they don't have running water, and it's just an amazing place. And I just want to flip through some of these. What I tried to do in my book, I was there in Afghanistan before, in the years before 9/11. I actually, in 2000, I was arrested by the Taliban and expelled from the country. And I went back in 2001 and 2002 for the war. And then I think, like all the other resources of the U.S. government, I went over to Iraq for the war in 2003, and I stayed there for about 4 years. So I've seen kind of the whole arc of this thing, and I wanted to. This is actually, I don't know if you can see it, this is actually a donkey parking lot. And that's sort of Father Time, minding the store there. Seriously, it was like 5 cents a piece or something to park your donkey. And I wish we could dim just a couple more lights. And I know you need lights. What I tried to do, there's been a lot of books on Afghanistan and Iraq, and I think even the really, really good ones, have been written from kind of 10,000 feet up, kind of the whys and hows in Washington and kind of the broad direction of the war. And I saw so much stuff up close that I wanted to write a book about kind of what it felt like to see it. And so I wanted to write not really an intellectual book, but I wanted to write kind of a visceral one and an emotional one. And, because for me, the sort of guiding principle when I wrote the book was, whenever I came out of Iraq or Afghanistan, people would say to me, I'd be in New York and people would say, my God, what's it like over there? And then I'd tell them a story, And so it's basically a bunch of, it's basically just a town in northern Afghanistan. It's basically a bunch of kind of vignettes. There was a film that was served as kind of an inspiration for me. And this is many years ago now, like 15 years ago. There was a film called 32 Short Films about Glenn Gould, the Canadian pianist. And I think if my book had a subtitle, it would be, 87 short films about Iraq and Afghanistan. It's just a bunch of scenes and passages. They're not necessarily linked together. This is actually, I don't know, God, I hope you can see it well. This is actually a ravine. There was an earthquake in northern Afghanistan, and these are just some women kind of walking kind of to nowhere. And I remember we were standing on the other side of this ravine kind of calling out to them. I'm just going to scroll through a few of these. So, again, I want to, looking back at Afghanistan, I think if there's a one word, or a one sentence explanation for 9/11, leaving everything else aside, it was kind of, I remember landing in Kabul in 1998, and it was this kind of completely destroyed city. And I'm going to show you a photo in just a second. This is nice. This is actually an old man. That's him. in the photograph, this is his camera. So, of course, he's very proud of himself. When you look like me in this part of the world and you show up, you always get an enormous crowd of people standing around you. So they're all very excited. I'm going to flip through a couple of these. I want to just show you. This is downtown Kabul in 1998. I don't know how well you can see that. This is actually Jaiti Maiwand, which is the main shopping street. And it actually is the main shopping street. And there were people living in the rubble here. I mean, it's just astonishing. And that, you know, if you want to just think, well, how come the Taliban happened, you know, and later Al-Qaeda and all the other things, it's that, you know. And it was just this completely destroyed place. And what I remember best from that time was, again, somebody like me walking around. There were the packs of orphans, you know, they would kind of travel in like packs of dogs. I mean, there were 50 and 100 of them, and they would kind of see you, and they would, you know, they would run, and they would kind of descend on you, and kind of, you know, and then really it was like a science fiction movie. It was, these Taliban guys would kind of come out of nowhere with these whips, and they would kind of beat them back, you know. And I remember thinking, my God, you know, where have I landed here, you know? So I'm just gonna let me just walk you through a few of these. This is actually father and son at the little glass blowing factory. So as I said, I was there in 1998, 1999, 2000, before 9/11. Why don't I just, you know, I was thinking, why don't I just read, I'll just read one little passage from there, if you can bear it. It's just a couple paragraphs. Really, let's see here. Let's see. Okay. I think this is actually, let's see what we have here. These are actually four sisters. Very happy to chat. Yeah, strikingly. I like that. This is sort of the Afghan version of American Gothic. I don't know if you can see it, but it's kind of father and son with sort of preemie. This is actually this is a nice photo because if you look at the street, this is Talokan, which is a city in northern Afghanistan, and it was when I was there. This is 1999. When I was there in 1999, there was it wasn't controlled. The Taliban were kind of 20 miles outside of town, and it was still controlled by the Northern Alliance. The Taliban came in about, you know, a month after I left, took over the town. I went back to the town when the Taliban fell in November of 2001. And it was just, if you can imagine it, you know, it's not exactly Times Square, but if I remember rolling into the town at sort of 5 o'clock as it was falling, and the Taliban were kind of running away. And it was just astonishing. You know, women were literally peeling their burqas off. Men were, I remember guys had they had hidden television sets under the ground. They put them in big plastic bags, and they were kind of pulling them out. And it was this enormous party. You know, it was a long time ago. It was 7 years ago. A lot has changed. But here with that, why don't I just, oh, here it is. Okay. Okay. Just bear with me, all right? It won't be too long. In the late afternoons, the center of Kabul had an empty twilight feel, a quiet that promised nothing more than another day like itself. There were hardly any cars then, just some women floating silently in their head-to-toe burqas. Old meat hung in the stalls, buildings listed in the ruins. On one of those afternoons, a thin little shoeshine boy walked up to me. He was smiling and running his finger across his throat. "Mother is no more," he said, finger across his neck. "Father is finished." His name was Nasir, and he repeated the phrase in German and in French, smiling each time as he did. "Mutter ist nicht mehr, Vater ist fertig." He dragged the finger across the throat again. "Rockets," he said. "Rocketen." His pale green eyes were rimmed in black. He did not ask for money. He wanted to clean my boots. Then he was gone, scampering down the muddy street with his tiny wooden box. Kabul was full of orphans like Nasir, woebegone children who peddled little labors and fantastic tales of grief. You'd see them in packs of 50 and sometimes even 100, skittering in mismatched shoes and muddy faces. They'd thunder up to you like a herd of wild horses. You could hear the padding of so many tiny feet. Sometimes I'd wonder where all the parents had gone, why they let their children run around like that. And then I'd catch myself.